All right, so before we actually start talking about the ocean toolset and the spectrum in particular, we need to talk about displacement and how it works. Even if you know instinctually how it works, there's some technical stuff we still need to go over. So here's a grid of, not really much of a grid, there's just 4 points. And if we want to displace this geometry here in regular geometry world, we'd put like a mountain down, and there's only 4 points, so we don't see much of anything. But if I increase the resolution on our grid, the more resolution we have, the more we actually are capturing what the actual displacement is supposed to be, as is defined by the noise on the mountain. The noise isn't changing as we add more resolution. There's just more resolution. There's more points to capture it, of course. So that's cool. Now, with displacement at render time, it will subdivide the geometry more ideally for us after we start rendering and say, chop these up into little points so that they are the exact size I need for them to be represented by a pixel, essentially, on the screen. So we won't need to have too many, and we won't have too few. We'll have more or less just the right amount so that we cannot tell that there's any like little flat facets to it. Now, I just rendered this flat thing, but it looks like this, which is more or less what we just saw. That's because the material I have on here is a shader that has displacement on, and built into this shader is a simple noise displacement. You can do all kinds of displacement, but this serves our purpose. So there you go. It diced up that very flat 4-point, 1-polygon surface into lots of little pieces at render time, based on how far the camera is from it. That, again, a pixel represents a small little, essentially, micropolygon. So there you go. So we have that. Now, the reason why we need to talk about a little bit more is that there's some technical stuff you need to know. One is the idea of the displacement bound. So I'm going to pause this. Every polygon, and again, in this case, there's only one polygon, every polygon gets a bounding box around it. The bounding box needs to be large enough that it can encompass the maximum distance that one of these little micropolygons might move to. So in this case, on the shader, we see a displacement bound of 1. There's a long expression in here based on their built-in displacement stuff, but essentially it boils down to, because the amplitude on this noise is 1, the points can only move up to 1 away. So having a displacement bound that is 1 away is safe. The purpose of the bounding box is when the rays come out from the camera, it will say, I should have saved the other one, but when the rays come out, if you hit the bounding box, you then need to say, okay, now I need to dice that surface, or I need to at least check to see that the surface has reached me up here. Because normally, if this was just a flat polygon, there would be empty space here. Like so. Because if the ray reached right here, there's nothing actually there. But this would be in the bounding box. And when it is in the bounding box, it'll say, oh, actually, there might be something here, because something might be actually getting displaced to me. And sure enough, there is in this case. Sometimes there won't be, and it'll be checking for nothing. But that's how it works. And the reason why this matters is because the smaller the bounding box, and honestly the less bounding boxes you have, the faster and less memory it can use. Especially memory-wise in terms of having less bounding boxes. Faster in terms of having small bounding boxes. So if I were to take this displacement bound and make it really small, it's broken now. The areas that are shaded are still correct, but it never found these taller areas because the bounding box is too small for it to think to check for them anymore. So why does that all matter? Because we want to have less bounding boxes. Problem is, there's a bounding box per polygon. So when we are doing our flip simulations later and we shade those, or rather we surface those, it's going to turn into a lot of polygons. And each of those polygons is going to get a bounding box. And that's just an unfortunate thing. Displacement is very good at adding a lot of detail to lower res things, to simpler things. But we're going to have a lot of resolution later. So here we go. See how many polygons I have here now? There's literally a million of them, ish. Now, this took 2 gigs of memory to render. But now, watch what happens when I render this. It's going to look pretty much identical, but it's going to use way more than 2 gigabytes of RAM. It's probably going to use more RAM than probably even many of you who are watching have on your computers. So let's see what happens. All this is to say is that we are going to need to prioritize having at once a high resolution sim, but also keep the resulting mesh down as low as possible. So here it is, 40 gigs of RAM. And again, this is the 2 gig version, this is the 40 gig version. There's no difference. They are literally identical. And it's just because it had to make a bounding box around every single polygon. So I hope that makes sense what displacement is doing. And if it wasn't clear, displacement is going to make the wave shapes. The wave tools are going to allow us to design waves, and they're going to be created at render time only. And we're going to blend our flip simulation that has its own unique watery movement, the splashiness of the boat going through it. We're going to blend it back into the more stately ocean waves. But we're going to have those ocean waves be on the flat areas of our flip sim. So this is going to be an issue later on.